Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 22 of this series that I've been doing, What Mayor Baba Really Taught. And I tried in this series to correct misconceptions of what Baba taught and to clarify things, especially where these are generally not understood and where it's really interesting. I'm not very interested in going over things that people already know or things that are kind of mundane you already get. They're easy to get. I want to do the tough ones. So this is hopefully interesting to people like me who like that kind of thing. It's meant for the purpose of this series, as I said in the first couple of segments, is it's meant for philosophers of the future who I think are going to be interested in what Mayor Baba had to say eventually. Right now, they're not. And that's why when you see my videos, you'll see that they're not very popular. I don't have a big following, but I have a little teeny following, and I really appreciate those people that do follow along and seem to like the program. But anyway, I better get on to the topic. So the topic today is reincarnation. And reincarnation is a very important part of Baba's teaching. And it's different than we normally encounter it elsewhere. And that's what I've got to talk about. And also, I've got to talk about why you can't really remove reincarnation from Baba's cosmology, because it's integrated. They're integrated. So sometimes in some faiths, the belief in reincarnation is sometimes kind of optional, but it doesn't really interfere with the rest of one's faith. For instance, I read this about the Alawites, which are a sect of Sufism, which is the mystical branch of Islam, and many Alawites do believe in reincarnation, but it's not essential to their faith. It doesn't interfere to not or to. But in Baba, well, you could say not believe in reincarnation. Like probably there's some Baba follower that has a hard time accepting the idea. But really, they're kind of missing out, because the whole idea of Baba's cosmology really could be described as a kind of reincarnation. I'm going to get into that. Now, first of all, reincarnation while it's a minority of the world that believes in reincarnation, it's a large minority. Hindus do, Buddhists do, and some countries where they used to be Buddhist, like Indonesia, they still generally do, even though they're Muslim. And as I just mentioned, there are branches of mystical Islam that do, and there are some Jews that do. They're mystical Jews, and of course, sects like, or whatever cults like Mayor Baba's following do, because that's what Mayor Baba did teach. But Baba's reincarnation is so different than what most people conceive of as reincarnation that I wish it had a different name, but it doesn't. We'll just have to call it Baba's reincarnation. Okay. Now, why is it different? Well, let's talk about this. First of all, I want to talk about the belief in reincarnation that's in the West. I looked it up, and in Europe and America, well, you wouldn't expect it, about 1/5 to 1/4 of people that are questioned and filled out, they have some level of belief in reincarnation, although they tend to be unclear about their ideas on it. Okay, so some foggy idea, but they sort of see it as possible or sometimes happens, but they're not sure why and what it has to do with. And also in polling, they don't find that the belief in reincarnation, has much effect on these people's lives. So it's not a deep part of their lives. For me, my family already heard of Mir Baba when I was just very little. And so I've grown up with nothing else, and it's very important how I see the world. It frames everything. But I'm going to get into that. Unfortunately, I kind of wish the world could get this, could receive this cosmology and this reframing of the universe with its divine purpose that Baba describes. But one of the big barriers to that is the fact that reincarnation is a barrier. People really feel uncomfortable with it. And, it's very much relegated to the paranormal, and they call it a phenomenon. And it says that in Wikipedia, I looked it up, and it said 1/4 of Americans believe in reincarnation, as well, astrology, parallel realities, and telepathy. So they kind of lump it in there. Like, no, I don't believe in astrology, but it's funny because that's sort of where it's lumped in. And whenever you see reincarnation in a movie, it's usually spooky. And they exploit the fact that people feel very, like it's really foreign, really strange. And so you're going to see a real paranormal movie. And I'm going to talk about that. Okay? Why is that? Why is it so spooky? It's not because they have it in Hinduism. People aren't afraid of Hindus. People do yoga. And that's from Hinduism. And people don't really mind the idea of karma. And that's from Hinduism. But reincarnation really puts them off. So I'm going to say a little why I think that is. First of all, whenever something has a sort of slant in the culture and in the media, in the movies, it's portrayed in a spooky way. Well, that's going to kind of condition people to think it's a spooky thing. But also, let me describe the reincarnation that most people envision when you talk to them. Well, first of all, there is this idea, it's not Baba's, that the soul is a thing. And you have two things then. You have your body, and you have another thing, it's your soul. And your soul is in your body. So you have a thing in your body. And then when you die, that thing leaves your body, and it finds another host, like the fetus of a growing baby in its mother's womb, and it enters that. Okay, that's called transmigration of the soul. The moving of the soul from the corpse to fetus. And frankly, that's a very bizarre and macabre and spooky and creepy idea. And it's very related to the idea of possession. And it's also related to a New Age idea, which is more recent, called walk-ins. Now, there was a movie called Heaven Can Wait. And in that movie, there's a football player who dies, and then it's worked out in heaven that they're going to put somebody else in his body. And so he jumps up on the football field and starts running, but it's somebody else in his body. So that's what people think reincarnation is. I remember talking about reincarnation in high school to a boy. His name was Mark Atkins. I still remember his name. He was the smartest guy in my class. And I mentioned that I believed in reincarnation, and he got kind of visibly panicky. And he said, "Nobody's going to tell me that there's somebody else in my body." So definitely what people are imagining as reincarnation is something more like walk-ins, which is a New Age, really creepy idea. So, or possession, or sort of, you go out haunting for a body and you possess it, And this definitely is also in the Buddhist form. That's what these things like this Book of the Dead stuff is, where you tell the soul, where it's going on, well, it's migrating to its parents, its next parents, in the afterlife. Well, that's not what Baba teaches. That's not what Baba teaches. Now, what Baba teaches is so different than that I'm going to have to sort of lay it out over here again. And I've been doing this over and over. I've been laying out the process that Baba describes of his theme, because it is a process, and so you kind of it helps to have it laid out like this, because you see one thing before another and what it's all leading to. And reincarnation fits right. It's not like another layer on top of it. It kind of is it, okay? When I was describing this process, it really is a kind of reincarnation, but not the kind that I just described. It's not where a thing enters into a body. There is no soul. There's nothing in my body except flesh and blood and water. Now, I'm going to have to lay out this this process again that I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 segments of this series. But I'm going to explain how reincarnation fits into it. So, first of all, I always got to start with that eye. And as I said last time, this does not represent eyesight. I use an eye because it's easy for me to draw, and people get what it is. And it represents perception. All right, I've already said all this. Or sometimes I say this is the soul, the one soul. In Baba, while he uses the word souls, we'll see what he means by souls when he says it in plural. But really, all those souls are really the one soul, which he sometimes calls the oversoul, or he sometimes calls it self with a capital S. There's only one self, and this one self is doing all the perceiving. It is the witness behind every finite self. It is that one self that sees through your eyes and hears through your ears and thinks through your mind. That's what Baba teaches. There's no real you separate from that. You are it. Now, while he sometimes says, and it's in God Speaks, sometimes he says all souls, individuals, are in the oversoul. But then he goes on, he says, but now we're going to take it further and say that they're not just in the oversoul, every soul is the oversoul. And that's in God Speaks. He makes that clarification, because God Speaks is kind of a transitional book where he's taking people who think one way and he's trying to help them think a new way. Whereas the book that he wrote in the box that I talked about earlier, 1926, it's for somebody who's really ready to hear the things without being spoon-fed. But Baba has to some extent, spoon-feed in his book, God Speaks. That's my opinion. Okay, that's why he has to start out talking so much about in, and then he can say, well, but really, ultimately, it is this one self. There's only one self. Now, not only is there only one self, but there's only, and let's say that self is God. We're all God, but we don't experience it. There's nothing but God. And I've said, in Baba's teaching, there is no God. Instead, there's only God. Right? Meaning there's not a thing there's not a God. There's only God. All right? But this God has the capacity to imagine as he awakes from a deep sleep original state. He has a whim to know himself, and he does a journey that's really a journey to discover himself, but this journey is done through a dream, and he likens this to a person who was in deep sleep, who then passes through the dream state on the way to fully awake state, which is true of people. We kind of have 3 stages, like we're unconscious, then we're semi-conscious, and we dream, and then we're fully awake. So that he uses as a parallel to this. God is waking, but as he wakes, he passes through this dream, and he dreams that he is all the things that he is not before he realizes that who he really is, which is the Creator. That's Mama's theme. I've been going over and over it, but I'm going to show where reincarnation comes in. Now, the next thing I've been doing when I've been laying this out, I've been laying out these lenses. Maybe people don't always know when they come in late that these things I draw, they represent an analogy of a lens. And these are perceptual schemas, or way of perceiving, and they shape and color what you see. You see, when I was a young man in my early 20s, I was a camera assistant for a feature film, a feature animated film. And I was there for a couple of years before I went to film school, actually. And there I changed lenses, and I did tests with filters that I put over them. And so I got a lot of analogy material that I later used, because that was my field. I was a camera assistant, and I saw how you put a special lens over the camera, and it's when you project it back later, it's real different. It changes what you perceive, or what the camera sees. So I use this as the analogy, which these are what Baba calls sanskaras, which means impressions on the mind, and they color everything you see once you have acquired it. So there's time, and then you see things temporally, then there's space, you see things spatially, and then there's the natural laws, which are going to govern all that is seen afterward, and those are relations of time and space in terms of number. And then we kind of have a numerical universe, and then finally, out of these supervenes, well, the sort of mathematical physical universe, but it's entirely just describable in math, which scientists tell us the world still is describable in terms of math. But then in this mathematical universe, we develop species one after the other, media, like eyes and antenna and ears and all, and nerves and nervous systems that allow us to interpret all this mathematical data as color and sound and pain and all the sensible things, sensible qualities. And so we kind of emerge here, these bodies. Well, who sees through these bodies? The one self. It's the only witness. And so let's say this is a chipmunk, okay? This oneself, or God, perceives through the sense media of the chipmunk. And in a sense, it experiences itself as this chipmunk, okay? And then eventually this chipmunk is going to die, its body is going to fail, as Baba says in Infinite Intelligence, and then it's going to forge another body, but this next body is going to have an even more advanced set of media for perception. And then let's say it's a wolf, even though it wouldn't jump from a chipmunk to a wolf. I'm just making the point that a wolf is more sophisticated than a chipmunk, and its mind is more awake, and its senses are very, very advanced and keen. And now, God no longer experiences itself as this chipmunk, it experiences itself as this wolf. Okay? And there's more to be said about this, how the wolf form actually forges, which I will or won't get into that here, or I will eventually. But that's kind of complicated, but it can be explained. And then eventually this wolf form will fail and the wolf will die. And then I'll tell you right now, the gathered schemas of that wolf that it acquired in its lifetime then are retained even from the time it dies. They're retained, and they form the mold of the next form. So let's say this next one is now a monkey, okay? Oh, I'm not going. That's not very good. Monkey, all right? It's like some kind of monkey. And this monkey, he's even, what is he? He's smarter. He's more receptive. He's more sensitive. And he's more conscious. And he even, more than the wolf and definitely more than the chipmunk, is starting to become self-aware, which is what it means to be fully conscious for Baba. But he's semi-self-aware, and he has the beginnings of rudimentary language, but he doesn't have language like we do, and I talk about that in both of my books, how language is evolving. And then eventually this one fails, and he comes back as a human being. Okay. But now he has come back and he has all the acquired impressions of his journey through evolution. Okay? Now, the real identity of this monkey was God. And then this human is now walking around in the world, and unknown to itself, unknown to God, God now takes himself as this first human being who's very primitive. It's his first human life. He's not an old soul. Well, he kind of is an old soul, all right? Now, if you want to call these souls, that's what Baba means by souls, okay? But when he says all souls are in the Oversoul, that's because there's nowhere else for them to be, because this is just a dream. It's kind of like saying your dream is in you, okay? More than you are in your dream. But in a sense, you find yourself in your dream. So both kind of have a certain sense. So talking in this kind of mystical realm, it becomes, we have some strange expressions. Well, anyway, eventually, this body fails, and the impressions gathered through this first human life are going to forge the mold of the impressions that are going to form the next human life, okay? All right. And this one, let's say, is a woman, all right? I don't know. Sorry if I give her a little lipstick. We're living in this world where the topic of men and women has become taboo, but I have to talk about it here. So anyway, let's give her a little nose ring. She's in India. All right, so now there's this, and then eventually that one fails. And we have all these lives. And eventually, this person comes back, and he really is an old soul now, okay? But it's really God experiencing himself as this person who's like an old soul. And I'm going to put a beard because I have a beard sometimes, and I'm going to draw him with a beard. And this old soul, he starts to be really interested in who he really is. He stops chasing the things of the world and cars, fast cars and girls and everything and money. And he starts saying, well, what is life really about? Okay? And so we sometimes call this one a sage, and we go and we talk to him. But he's not as advanced as the one who finally comes back. And he's more humble. And he has really gained wisdom. So it's more like Buddha here. And he goes and he finds a perfect master who's already achieved realization of himself, and he surrenders to him. And he says, I want to be your disciple. Lead me. So this is like the disciples of Jesus. And Jesus says to them, leave all and follow me. And then he leads them. Okay? And he takes them to the goal. And which is eventually to realize Christ within themselves, that is within themselves. And this is what Christ meant when he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And all the things that Jesus said, that which you do to the least of these, including these animals, you do to me. Okay? So this is, and then finally, this one has advanced, has gotten over all his animal impressions. He's no longer full of lust and greed, although nobody's perfect. Even saints often have limitations until they really, really, really surrender. You read the story of Saint Augustine or Saint Francis. And they start out as they're still kind of wild, but then they really get serious about finding God. What does that mean to find God? I'm seeking God, okay? I'm wandering through the desert, finding God. I'm looking for God. And all the while, it's God looking for God. Baba comments on this all the time. And it's all, when he surrenders his attachment to his limited self, he realizes his real self. And that's called God realization. So now, when you look at a world that's evolving, okay, let's say this is a planet, here's a continent, and there's all these different species on it, okay? And this is interesting. All these species pretty much make up this world because, you know, a lot of the soil is made of the bodies of species that have died. You know, it's called fossilized materials in the earth, like coal and peat, and so it's organic material. And so, in a way, the world is this process. And for Baba, the earliest forms of stone, which I've left out here, if he has gas, and he has stone, and he has metal, and he had then, even before he has vegetation, and then he has all the animals. So everything in the universe is really a media that one has to experience to find oneself. And I kind of left this out because it's a little weird even for me to think of rocks as having a little bit of consciousness. But Baba says that stone has sort of like it's more than zero, you know, amount. I can't remember how he words it. It's very little. So obviously it's hardly mentionable. But there's the beginning of consciousness right away, and all the forms are media for the experience of the world, and they end up being the rocks, the metals, the this and the gases, and then all these species, and then all these people. They end up being the world. All right? So there's this, you know, song, "We Are the World." This means it in a much more literal sense. And meaning our bodies that we've left behind, the media that we've used and discarded along the way, that makes up the literal planet and the air that we breathe. So when we're talking about this cosmology, it kind of is a reincarnation. Now, Baba doesn't call evolution reincarnation. Baba calls this reincarnation, okay, and he calls this, actually from here to here, he calls this evolution. All right. And when I was talking about the person becoming more advanced, Baba calls this involution. Probably, I don't know if I'm off, yeah. Well, let's just do an arrow. He calls it involution, and I haven't gone into this, but that's where you discard all these lenses that you've acquired to find yourself, and then once you do that, you become one with yourself. Okay, so that's what reincarnation is for Baba. You don't have, nothing's moving through anything, because all this, see, space, it's right here, which makes things look spatial. Things look spatial in the phenomenal world, but space isn't real. And the soul, or the self, the real self, or God, is not spatial. It precedes the appearance. See, space, this is space. It's a lens that makes things spatial, appear spatial. And God sees all things after that is formed, as he's evolving, as spatial. But God precedes the schema of space. And this is what is meant when we say that God transcends space and time. He precedes those qualities that he himself attributes in imagination to the phenomenal world. He's not in the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is an illusion, and he or she or it, if we're talking about the it as the infinite intelligence, even Baba uses the word it with a capital I, it is not illusion. It is real. This is its imagination and is not real. Only God is real. Those are all about what things Baba says. It's very consistent. And you, let's say you're here, you're, in a sense, very real in that you are that one reality, having this experience. So, David Icke says, there's just this one consciousness having all these individual experiences. And that's kind of like worded different than Baba does, but he's intuiting the same thing. I really like David Icke. I know he says that the elite are reptiles, but there are days where I think that his analogy is apropos. Baba would not agree in that they're reptiles, because in Baba, the forms of evolution are set, and there's a set way you get to be a human, and it's not by being a reptile first, right before. I mean, at one point we were. Now, I'll say something about the species. Okay, so there's all these species of living things in the organic universe, and for Baba, he actually adopts this Buddhist idea that there are exactly 186,000 forms in evolution, and that the soul, in its individual feeling way, has to experience itself as every single one before it can be a human. And then once it's human, unless a master intervenes, and he's lucky enough to get help, he will then have 8,400,000 lives as a human being, Baba says. That would be it's kind of hard to get your mind around that. Which means that if people have had millions of lives, they couldn't have been on this planet. They began on another planet. And Baba says there are 18,000 planets with human beings on them. And eventually they have to migrate to the Earth to experience God realization, meet the master. And this is where the masters take birth. And this is all in one of, I forget which number. It's all in this series. I talk about this, and elsewhere in another series I talk about that. The other planets. But the Earth, Baba says, has a special role. Now, there's always an Earth, and he doesn't literally mean it has to be this literal planet, because it plays a role. It's like we always have a president, but the office is held by different people in the series. And so when this Earth becomes cold and the sun burns out, somewhere else in the universe, another Earth, Baba says, is forming, because there always has to be the planet for the final stage of involution, which takes place on one planet called the Earth. And but that, although that's putting a lot into this one lecture, that is part of Baba's cosmology, the idea of these 18,000 worlds with human life. And he even mentions it very briefly in God Speaks, his main book. But he doesn't go into any detail, but he mentions it. And there are other books where he does go into detail about that. And that's part of the evolutionary process also, because there are planets that just have vegetables, and there are planets that have vegetables and mammals and animals, but no humans. And I've talked about all this before. Let's get off that. So what's the difference? The difference is there's no transmigration of the soul. This is the only real soul, and even your sense of identity and your consciousness that you've evolved, we're using the word you now, because you might as well be out here, because because when God takes himself to be, say, this woman, he might as well be that woman, because that sense of identity is so strong, and it's going to be so long before she has lived all these lives to become perfect, that for all intents and purposes, she is a person. in a way, she's not God. All right? Now, I'll point out one other funny thing. Species, animals like birds, are closer to God in that they began the process more recently. And the people actually grow further from God before they turn around and go inward and find God. So that's another part of his theme, is that, people feel so much love for nature. It's because nature, in a way, is closer to God. And the first humans, when they evolve, are the furthest away. And now sometimes you hear somebody described as an old soul. Okay, I'm done with this. Sometimes you hear that expression, and there's some truth to it. But remember, there's really only one soul, and it's eternal, and it's not even in time. So in one sense, it's meaningless to talk of an old soul and a new soul, but in the sense that God experiences this journey, that expression of himself, it can be old or young. But all people are old souls because they've already come through this evolutionary process. And but once in a while, even people who don't believe in God or reincarnation or heaven and hell will come upon a person so extraordinary, well, sometimes as a child even, will have such character, such intelligence, or such talent, let's say a prodigy, that we say, oh my God, this is an old soul. And my daughter's drama teacher, he said that at her graduation defense. You have a defense kind of like in college, at her art high school when she was 17. And he said, Megan is what we call an old soul. And so now, even if you're not an old soul, let's say you have all those drives that indicate that you're like still have a very powerful id, and you still have a lot of animal impressions left over from your evolution. Baba says those things are good when you're in evolution, but when you're a human being, you don't you want to get beyond these the sort of primitive physical urges and start to look toward the subtler things, the higher things. But even if you are, you can always be redeemed, especially if you as they say in Christianity, that you repent and that you turn your life over to Jesus, or you, as Baba describes, go find an awakened master who's actually finished this journey. Now, what happens when a person finishes the journey? It's a part of the reincarnation too, if I'm going to cover it all. That person, most people, they achieve moksha, the term from Hinduism, and Baba uses it. There's also the word mukti, and he uses the word ordinary mukti. And that's where a person who's really good, God-fearing, he's had all these lives, and he kind of strikes the gambler. He broke even, kind of, and when he dies, he takes no more births, and he becomes one, and he experiences bliss, and that's it. That's he experienced the journey, experienced who he was, and he experiences bliss, never-ending bliss. But for a small number, there's a destiny has to be that they stay in the world even after they're God realized and help others. And they, Baba says, are called perfect masters. And he says there's always a certain number of them in the world. But when they pass away, they too experience the bliss, and they leave the world. There's no ascended masters in Baba. There's no masters that are kind of watching from, a place called Shambhala or something. Shambhala, Baba says, is the place, the state of consciousness that you achieve when you drop your body after you've completed the journey. But it's not a real place. It's a state of consciousness, and it's a bliss state, and it doesn't include experience of this illusion. And finally, if we're going to cover everything that pertains to reincarnation, we have to say something about the avatar. And Baba says that this is probably one of the, I don't know, I was going to say it's controversial, probably. It sounds like it would be for people because it sort of steps on the toes of people of other faiths. But he says that Ram, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and himself, Meher Baba, are a special perfect master that never takes the experience of Shambhala forever, but is always pulled down by the other perfect masters every 700 to 1400 years as a kind of a savior, or may in a way, it's in the fullest sense God in human form, and this is like Jesus, and that's what Baba says he is. And the avatar has essentially been reincarnating since the beginning of creation, and was the first soul to take this journey. And when it began this journey, just like every soul that takes this journey, who is really the oversoul, it doesn't know initially what it's doing. It's ignorant. And it gains consciousness and understanding. And eventually, now this first soul that did this, there was no master for it to surrender to and have help. It had to achieve this itself. And when it did, he died, and he experienced himself as the oversoul, and then he began to return every 700 to 1400 years. And that's sort of the last thing we could say about this topic. And so the avatar, the full theme of creation, can't really be told without including the avatar concept. So, in a way, Baba makes himself sort of the culmination of the whole process, sort of like the last secret, revealed, I guess you could say. But I once asked my daughter, why do you believe in Baba still? A lot of kids that grow up in Baba, they don't have me to explain Baba to. So they actually think, I could talk about it another day, the things that they're taught, which are incorrect. Or they're not taught anything at all, because parents find this kind of uninteresting. So she said, because it makes sense. It makes sense. And I said, well, what did you mean it made sense? At first I thought she meant, the whole cosmology made sense. Well, that's not what she meant. She just meant there's all these religions. They're always fighting. And it just makes sense that they're all really created by the same one, the avatar. And Baba says, my daughter says, this should be called avatarianism. Because that's really what this is that we follow, that we believe. Because we don't believe that that Baba is the only way, because we believe that Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha and Krishna are all the same one. They're all Baba. So we try to learn about the other avatars and the other faiths, because according to Baba, they're all kind of like beads on one string, as he once said. And he said when he came to America in 1932, he said, "I've come not to start a new religion, but to bring all the religions together like beads on one string." So that would be Avatarianism. And then you see that this whole thing is kind of the story of the Avatar, in that he was the first one to make this journey. And by making that journey, when he was the first chipmunk, there naturally were his parent chipmunks, and there were other chipmunks, and there were all kinds of other animals of lower order, but nothing higher. And so he found himself in that world, and he was kind of the oldest soul in the world of chipmunks. In a way, he had created everything that came before, in that he was the first to take that experience and forge that species, and then its progeny became all the chipmunks, and all the chipmunks today are still related to the chipmunks then. And then he achieved an experience of himself as a man. And Baba says that's what Adam really signifies, the first avatar. Okay, that sums that up. I covered more than I thought I would. I don't know what else to add. Okay, I'll see you on the other side with part 23. All right, take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.